My ex-girlfriend spent years in another city searching for happiness, then returned expecting to find me struggling. But I had already become very successful, and now she regrets it. My name is Lisa, and I'm not going to lie to you about what happened. I thought I had everything figured out perfectly. Tyler and I had been together for 4 incredible years. We were absolutely perfect together in every conceivable way. Our relationship was the kind that other people envied, the kind that made you believe in soulmates and happily ever after. When I received that job offer in Chicago, I knew exactly what I was doing. I had this whole philosophy about relationships, you see. Sometimes you need to live a little before settling down, right? Experience life on your own terms. Figure out who you are as an individual. Tyler, sweet and patient Tyler, would be there waiting for me when I was finally ready to commit fully. All of these experiences just confirmed what I already knew deep in my heart. Tyler was the one. He was my person, my soulmate, my endgame. These other guys were just practice, just placeholders, just ways to make absolutely sure I wouldn't have any regrets when I eventually went back to him. They were helping me appreciate what I had with Tyler even more. But instead of being able to have a rational, private conversation with Tyler about my concerns, he completely overreacted to my presence. He started raising his voice, making a scene in front of everyone, acting like I was some crazy, dangerous person instead of someone who just wanted to make sure he wasn't making the biggest mistake of his life by marrying the wrong person. All I said was that I thought we should talk privately for a few minutes, that I had some important things to tell him about what I'd realized and understood during my time away. That's it. That's literally all I said. And Tyler acted like I was threatening him or his fiancée or trying to ruin their special moment. The whole situation escalated so fast it was honestly shocking to witness. Tyler's friends were suddenly surrounding me like I was some kind of dangerous criminal who posed a physical threat to everyone in the room. Madison was crying and carrying on like the drama queen she is, making everything about her and her feelings instead of considering what might actually be best for Tyler in the long run. People were staring and whispering and treating me like I'd committed some terrible, unforgivable crime by showing up and wanting to have a conversation. When someone actually called the police, like I was a criminal instead of someone who loved Tyler enough to try to save him from making a huge mistake. I couldn't believe how far this whole thing had been blown out of proportion. Getting escorted out of the venue by cops was humiliating and degrading, obviously. But what really hurt, what really broke my heart, was seeing how easily Tyler let it happen. This person who used to love me, who used to say I was the most important thing in his world, who used to promise he'd always protect me and stand up for me, just stood there and watched while they treated me like a stranger, like a threat, like someone who didn't matter at all. That wasn't the Tyler I knew and had fallen in love with all those years ago. The real Tyler, the man I'd spent 4 incredible years with, would never have let anyone treat me like that, no matter what the circumstances were. He would have defended me, or at least tried to handle the situation with some compassion and understanding instead of just standing there like a passive bystander. This just proved how much Madison had systematically poisoned him against me over the years they'd been together. She'd obviously been filling his head with lies and paranoid fantasies about my intentions, making him see me as some kind of threat instead of someone who genuinely cared about his happiness and well-being. My friends were all completely freaked out afterward, going on and on about restraining orders and potential legal consequences, and how I needed to get professional help immediately. Like I was the problem in this situation. Like I was somehow the villain for trying to save someone I cared about from making a huge mistake that would ruin his life. Even Kelly, who's known me forever and has always been one of my closest friends, was acting like I'd done something completely unforgivable, instead of just trying to have an honest conversation with Tyler about our shared history and what we'd meant to each other. They started threatening me with serious jail time if I didn't leave Tyler alone permanently and never contact him again. Like loving someone deeply was some kind of crime. Like caring about someone's future happiness was something I should be ashamed of or punished for. By the 3rd year in Chicago, I started getting these intense pangs of longing, not homesickness exactly, but Tyler sickness. I'd see couples at Sunday brunch, laughing over mimosas and sharing pancakes, and I'd think about how Tyler and I used to do that exact same thing at that little place downtown with the amazing Belgian waffles and the outdoor seating. I'd watch romantic movies on Netflix and remember how Tyler would always let me pick what we watched, even though I knew he absolutely hated romantic comedies but sat through them anyway because he loved me. So I made the decision to leave town again. Not because I was giving up on Tyler or accepting defeat, but because it was clear that he needed more time and space to realize what he was throwing away. Sometimes, people need to live with their mistakes for a while, need to experience the consequences of their poor choices before they can understand what they've lost and what they had before. I can be patient when I need to be. I've already waited 5 years. What's a little longer in the grand scheme of things? Real love is worth waiting for, no matter how long it takes. Real love endures through everything: time, distance, other people's interference, even legal threats and social pressure. Eventually, Tyler will get tired of playing house with someone who doesn't really know him. Someone who's turned him into a version of himself that isn't authentic or true to who he really is deep down. When this whole marriage thing crashes and burns the way I know it inevitably will, when Madison's true controlling nature finally reveals itself completely, and Tyler realizes what he's gotten himself into, I'll be ready. I'll be waiting with open arms and an open heart, ready to welcome him back to where he truly belongs. Because that's what you do when you really love someone with your whole soul. You don't give up on them, even when they've temporarily given up on themselves. You don't abandon them to make mistakes that will haunt them for the rest of their lives. True love means never giving up, no matter what obstacles are thrown in your way. And what Tyler and I have, what we've always had, is true love in its purest, most powerful form. Nothing and no one can destroy that, not permanently. Not even Tyler himself, no matter how hard he tries to convince himself that he's moved on and found something better. I know him better than that. I know us better than that. And eventually he'll remember too. I'd walk past jewelry stores in the shopping district and start imagining what kind of engagement ring he'd eventually pick for me when the time came. I could picture him standing there, probably overthinking every detail, wanting to choose something perfect that would show how much he understood my taste and personality. But I wasn't ready to go back yet. I still had more living to do, more experiences to collect, more stories to tell. Plus, rushing back after only 3 years would have looked desperate, and I definitely wasn't desperate. I was being strategic about this whole thing. Tyler needed to miss me enough to truly appreciate what we'd had together, but not so much that he'd completely moved on. It was a delicate balance, and I was managing it perfectly. The 4th year was when I really started feeling the pull home more intensely. The Chicago scene was beginning to feel repetitive and shallow. All the guys were starting to blend together and feel exactly the same. I'd catch myself scrolling through old photos of Tyler and me on my phone late at night, zooming in on our faces and remembering exactly how happy we looked together. That's when I knew I was almost ready to return. Almost, but not quite yet. I just needed 1 more year to make absolutely certain I'd gotten everything out of my system. 1 more year to guarantee that I could commit to Tyler completely without any lingering what-ifs or wondering about the road not taken. By year 5, I was so ready to go home it wasn't even funny anymore. I had done absolutely everything I wanted to do in Chicago. I'd been with all the different types of guys I'd been curious about. The successful businessman, the creative artist type, the bar owner entrepreneur, you name it. I had lived the single life to its absolute fullest, experiencing every aspect of independence and freedom that I'd craved when I first made the decision to leave. And the best part? Tyler had waited for me. Of course he had waited. I never doubted it for a second. What we had doesn't just die because of time and distance. Real love endures through anything. Real love waits patiently. Real love understands that sometimes people need to take detours and explore different paths before they find their way home to where they truly belong. Tyler's side of the story. Hey, this is Tyler. When Lisa left for Chicago, it hurt like absolute hell. We'd been together for 4 years, building what I thought was a solid foundation for our future, and she just decided out of nowhere that she needed to explore herself. We both knew what that really meant. She wanted to sleep around and see what else was out there. I'm not stupid. What we had was real. It was deep and meaningful in ways that most people never experience. This was the kind of love that doesn't just disappear because of geography or time or whatever other obstacles life throws at you. Real love endures, and I was absolutely certain that ours would too. I was pretty messed up about the whole situation for maybe 6 months afterward. I'm not going to lie about that. I spent way too many nights drinking with my buddies, wondering constantly what I had done wrong in our relationship. I kept checking her social media accounts like an idiot, hoping against hope that she'd call and say she'd made a terrible mistake and wanted to come home. My friends kept telling me I needed to get back out there and start dating again, but I just wasn't ready for that. Every woman I met felt completely wrong somehow, like I was unfairly comparing them to Lisa, even when I didn't want to be doing that. It took me almost a full year before I went on my first real date after the breakup. And even then, it was only because my coworker basically forced me to go out with his girlfriend's sister. She was a nice girl, don't get me wrong, but nothing came of it. There was no spark, no connection, nothing that made me want to see her again. Slowly, though, I started getting my life back together piece by piece. I started going to the gym more consistently, picked up some hobbies I'd been putting off for years, and actually began enjoying being single instead of just wallowing in self-pity about what I'd lost. I had a few casual things here and there over the next couple of years. A couple of relationships that lasted a few months each, but nothing too serious or intense. Nothing that made me feel like shit about myself either, though. Just normal dating experiences, figuring out what I actually wanted in a partner instead of just missing what I'd lost with Lisa. Then about 2.5 years after Lisa left for Chicago, I met Madison at my buddy Connor's birthday party. She was visiting from out of state, staying with her brother who worked with Connor, and we just hit it off immediately from the moment we started talking. She was funny and down to earth, and she didn't have any of that game-playing bullshit that seemed to come with every other woman I'd been meeting since becoming single again. We talked all night at that party, exchanged numbers before she left, and when she made the decision to move to town a few months later, I'd be lying if I said I wasn't a significant part of the reason she chose our city. Madison is nothing like Lisa, which honestly was exactly what I needed at that point in my life. Where Lisa always had to analyze everything to death, constantly overthinking every decision and conversation, always planning 10 steps ahead and making everything unnecessarily complicated, Madison just goes with the flow. She has this natural, easygoing personality that I found incredibly refreshing. She actually laughs at my stupid jokes instead of rolling her eyes or giving me that look that says she thinks I'm being childish. She genuinely wants to do outdoor activities on weekends, hiking, camping, going to the beach, instead of complaining about getting dirty or ruining her hair or whatever other excuses Lisa used to come up with. Madison doesn't make me feel like I'm constantly being tested or judged against some impossible standard that I'll never be able to meet. It's easy with her in a way that my relationship with Lisa never was. It's comfortable and natural, like we're actually on the same team working toward the same goals, instead of playing against each other in some complicated game where I never understood the rules. We moved in together after about a year of dating, because why wait around when you know you found something good? By the time Lisa decided to show her face back in town, Madison and I had been solid together for almost 3 years. We were talking seriously about getting engaged, looking at houses in the nicer part of town, planning real, concrete things for our future together. I hadn't thought about Lisa in months, except maybe when someone brought up old high school stories or whatever random memories from the past. The breakup conversation was honestly beautiful in its own way. I sat him down and explained that I needed to explore myself, to find out who I was outside of our relationship. I watched his face as I spoke, and he got this look, like he understood what I was saying but was also completely heartbroken by it. That expression just proved how much he truly loved me. So when she showed up at my usual coffee spot that Thursday morning, I was genuinely surprised to see her standing there. She looked good, seemed happy and put together, like Chicago had treated her well. We had this totally normal catch-up conversation about her being back in town permanently, how Chicago had been for her during those 5 years, and what she was doing for work now that she'd moved back. I told her about Madison, mentioned that we were living together, and things were going really well between us. Lisa seemed happy for me in that polite, distant way you are when you run into an ex who's clearly moved on with their life. The whole interaction was actually nice and mature and friendly, with no weird tension or awkward silences that you might expect from that kind of encounter. Then I started seeing her around town more often than seemed normal. She was at the coffee shop again the next week, and I bumped into her at the grocery store that weekend. I even ran into her at the bank when I was there depositing a check from work. It made perfect sense, though. She had mentioned moving back to the area for her new job. So of course, we were going to cross paths regularly. It's a small town. We shop at the same grocery stores, go to the same coffee places, use the same bank. It was bound to happen when someone new moves into your neighborhood. The conversations were always pleasant enough. Just casual catching up like you do with anyone you used to know well. She'd ask about my job and how things were going at the consulting firm. I'd ask about hers and how she was adjusting to small town life again after 5 years in a big city like Chicago. She'd share some funny story about readjusting to the slower pace of life here, or complain about how early everything closes compared to what she was used to. Normal stuff. Nothing that set off any alarm bells in my mind. I had mentioned these casual encounters with Lisa to Madison in passing. Just because I tell her about my day, and sometimes Lisa happened to be part of it. Madison thought it was actually pretty cool that we could be civil with each other after everything that had happened. She said it showed that we were both mature adults about how our relationship had ended, which was refreshing compared to all the horror stories you hear about bitter exes who can't be in the same room together. My friend said the same thing when the topic came up in conversation. They thought it was genuinely refreshing to see two exes who could be completely normal around each other, instead of creating unnecessary drama or making everyone else feel uncomfortable when they were both at the same social events. But then Lisa started bringing up old memories during these conversations, and that's when things began to feel a little off. Little things at first, nothing too obvious or inappropriate. She'd say something like, "Remember that terrible horror movie we saw at the drive-in that made you jump completely out of your seat?" Or, "Remember how we used to get those huge ice cream sundaes at that place downtown and could never finish them?" I figured she was just being nostalgic, maybe missing the familiar stuff after spending 5 years somewhere completely different where she didn't have any shared memories with anyone. It seemed harmless enough, and I didn't want to be rude by shutting down her attempts at friendly conversation. The thing was, these encounters kept happening with increasing frequency, like more often than you'd realistically expect, even in a small town where everyone shops at the same 3 places and goes to the same handful of restaurants and coffee shops. Lisa's manipulation campaign. I mean, if someone doesn't fight for you at least a little bit, do they even really love you? But Tyler wasn't the fighting type. He was more the quiet, patient, waiting type, which was exactly why I knew he'd be there when I finished doing what I needed to do. His gentle nature was one of the things I loved most about him, and it gave me complete confidence in my plan. Okay, so here's what I figured out pretty quickly after moving back. Tyler wasn't seeing the big picture of what was really happening. He thought these little coffee shop chats and grocery store encounters were just coincidences, just two mature adults being civil about their shared past. But I could tell he was genuinely confused about what he really wanted deep down. I mean, you don't spend 4 intense years with someone and just forget about that connection completely, right? Especially not when that someone was me, and especially not when what we had was as real and deep as our relationship had been. The problem was this whole Madison situation. I'd heard about her through our mutual friends even before I moved back to town, and honestly, I wasn't worried about her at first. She sounded so incredibly basic from everything people told me, like aggressively basic. The kind of girl who posts pictures of her coffee cup every single morning on social media and thinks that hiking on weekends constitutes having a personality trait. But seeing the effect she was having on Tyler in person, it became obvious to me that she was manipulating him somehow. She was making him think he was genuinely happy and fulfilled, when really he was just settling for something easy and convenient instead of fighting for what he truly wanted deep in his heart. Every time I brought up our history together, our real connection and the deep conversations we used to have about life and philosophy and our dreams for the future, Tyler would get this glazed, distant look in his eyes. Then he'd quickly change the subject back to surface-level small talk about work or the weather or whatever safe topic he could think of. Like when I mentioned how we used to talk for hours about traveling to Europe together, how we had all those detailed plans mapped out for visiting Italy and France, and seeing all the historical sites we'd studied in college. Tyler just brushed it off like those conversations had never happened, like they were just silly fantasies instead of real plans we'd made together. That wasn't the Tyler I knew and loved. The real Tyler was passionate about exploring the world and experiencing new cultures. He loved planning adventures and dreaming big about our future together. This version of him sitting across from me in the coffee shop was just smaller somehow, more constrained, like someone had put limits on his imagination and enthusiasm for life. And don't even get me started on what I was hearing about their relationship through the grapevine around town. Apparently, they spent their weekends doing all this outdoorsy stuff, hiking through muddy trails, camping in tents without proper bathrooms, spending entire days trudging through the woods looking at trees and rocks. This would be fine, I guess, except Tyler used to absolutely hate that kind of thing when we were together. He would complain every single time I suggested we go for even a simple walk around the neighborhood, let alone spend a whole day getting sweaty and dirty in nature. He was always making excuses about being too tired from work, or not wanting to deal with bug bites, or saying his allergies were acting up. But now suddenly he's transformed into this outdoorsman who apparently loves nothing more than sleeping on the hard ground and cooking over a campfire? Please. That's not personal growth or discovering new interests. That's someone pretending to be interested in activities they actually hate just to keep their girlfriend happy and avoid conflict. Chicago was everything I thought it would be and more. The nightlife was incredible, the dating scene was exciting, and the freedom was absolutely intoxicating. I could go out on a Wednesday night without having to text anyone about where I was, what I was doing, or when I'd be coming home. I could flirt with that attractive guy at the bar without feeling guilty about it. I could wake up in unfamiliar apartments on Sunday mornings without having to explain myself to anyone. The cooking thing really got to me too. Our mutual friend Kelly mentioned seeing them together at the farmer's market on Saturday mornings, buying all these fancy organic ingredients and exotic vegetables I'd never even heard of. Apparently, Tyler has become this whole domestic god who makes elaborate gourmet dinners every single night, experimenting with different cuisines and techniques. Except when we were together, this man lived almost exclusively on takeout Chinese food and frozen pizzas. I used to beg him to cook with me, trying to make it romantic and fun, suggesting we could make it like a date night activity. And he'd always have some excuse about being too tired from work, or not wanting to deal with all the cleanup afterward, or claiming he was just naturally bad at cooking and would probably burn the house down. But now he's apparently Julia Child incarnate because Madison wants him to be? It was so painfully obvious what was happening here. She was systematically changing him, molding him into whatever version of a boyfriend she wanted, instead of accepting and loving him for who he really was underneath all these forced modifications. And Tyler, sweet and naive Tyler, probably thought this was what love was supposed to feel like, because he'd never experienced someone trying to systematically control and change him before. With us, he could always be himself, messy when he wanted to be messy, lazy on Sunday afternoons when he just wanted to watch TV in his pajamas, completely honest about what he did and didn't want to do without fear of judgment or manipulation. But with Madison, he was performing this elaborate act, pretending to be someone he fundamentally wasn't. The worst part was seeing how she'd managed to isolate him from his real friends without him even realizing what was happening. Not in an obvious, dramatic way that would have raised red flags, but subtly and gradually over time. I noticed that Tyler had stopped mentioning the guys he used to hang out with constantly. Connor, Jake, that whole crew who'd been his best friends since college and had always been such an important part of his life. These were guys he used to see multiple times every week. Guys he'd known for over a decade and considered brothers. Suddenly, every story he told was, Madison and I did this, and Madison and I went there, and Madison thinks this about that topic. It was like she had become his only source of social interaction and meaningful conversation. That's classic manipulation tactics right there. Making someone completely dependent on you by slowly but systematically cutting them off from their support system and independent relationships. When I tried to remind him of who he used to be before her influence, when I brought up the dreams and goals we used to talk about together, the person he was before she got her claws into him and started this transformation project, Tyler would get defensive. Not angry defensive exactly, but more like confused defensive. Like he couldn't quite remember what I was talking about, but knew he should be able to. It was absolutely heartbreaking, honestly. Watching someone I cared about so deeply lose himself like that. Watching him become this smaller, more constrained version of who he really was inside. I started making more of an effort to be around town, to be present and available, showing him through my actions that someone could appreciate the real Tyler instead of trying to turn him into someone completely different. Not in a pushy or inappropriate way, of course. I was just being a friend, being supportive, reminding him of what genuine connection and acceptance felt like. I'd ask detailed questions about his job at the consulting firm, really listen when he talked about the projects he was working on, remember specific details about his life that actually mattered to him as an individual. The entire time, I carried this warm feeling in my chest, knowing that Tyler was back home, probably thinking about me constantly. He was probably missing me terribly, and I was definitely confident he wasn't dating anyone seriously. How could he, after what we'd shared together? Because here's the thing that Madison apparently didn't understand. I knew Tyler. I really truly knew him on a level that takes years to develop. I knew he got anxious about presentations at work and would spend days beforehand practicing what he was going to say. I knew he had this weird but endearing habit of organizing all his books by color instead of by author or subject, because he liked the way it looked on the shelves. I knew he secretly loved terrible reality TV shows like The Bachelor and Love Island, but was embarrassed to admit it to most people because he thought it made him seem less intellectual. 4 years of real intimacy and deep emotional connection doesn't just disappear because some new girl comes along and temporarily distracts him with outdoor activities and home-cooked meals. What Tyler needed was someone to remind him of his true worth, his real dreams and aspirations, the person he was meant to be before Madison started her project of turning him into her ideal boyfriend. And if Madison actually cared about him the way she claimed to, wouldn't she want him to be genuinely happy? Wouldn't she want him to be authentic to himself instead of trying to mold him into her personal vision of the perfect partner? The fact that she was obviously threatened by me being back in town just proved that deep down, she knew their relationship was built on shaky ground. She understood, even if she wouldn't admit it to herself, that what Tyler and I had shared was real and meaningful in ways that her relationship with him could never be. I wasn't trying to sabotage anything or cause problems. I was trying to save him from making the biggest mistake of his life by settling for someone who didn't truly know or appreciate who he really was underneath all the changes she'd imposed on him. Tyler realizes something is wrong. Looking back now, I should have seen the signs much earlier than I did. But honestly, I was giving Lisa the benefit of the doubt because I didn't want to be that paranoid, jealous guy who thinks his ex is stalking him. I wanted to believe that we could both be mature adults about our shared history. But after about a month of these supposedly coincidental encounters happening with increasing frequency, even I had to admit that something genuinely weird was going on. The conversations were getting longer and more emotionally intense, for one thing. What had started as quick 5-minute polite hellos at the coffee shop had gradually turned into 20 or 30-minute deep discussions about life and memories. And all this heavy emotional stuff that felt way too personal and inappropriate for someone I hadn't been with in 5 years. And Lisa had developed this way of positioning herself physically during these conversations that made it extremely difficult for me to just politely end the discussion and leave. She'd corner me by the cream and sugar station at the coffee shop, or block my path to the door while she was talking, or somehow maneuver herself so that I'd have to be actively rude to walk away from her mid-sentence. Then there was this weird thing she was doing with memories. Every single conversation, without fail, she'd bring up some incredibly specific detail from when we were dating together. But not just any random detail. She always chose something romantic or intimate or deeply meaningful from our relationship history. The guys I met in Chicago were fun and exciting, but they were never Tyler. Sure, I had my fair share of flings and casual relationships. There was Jake, the marketing guy who looked like he belonged in a cologne commercial with his perfectly styled hair and designer suits. Then there was Daniel from work, who took me to all those fancy restaurants downtown and always insisted on ordering the most expensive wine on the menu. I even had a brief thing with this guy who owned a trendy wine bar, though honestly, I'm blanking on his name right now, which probably says something about how memorable he was. She'd mentioned the exact song that was playing on the radio the first time we kissed, or the specific thing I had said to her on her birthday 3 years ago that had made her cry happy tears, or some private inside joke we'd shared that I'd honestly forgotten about completely. It was like she'd been keeping this detailed mental catalog of our entire 4-year relationship and was systematically going through it, bringing up one carefully chosen memory per encounter. What really started freaking me out was how she'd respond whenever I mentioned Madison or our relationship. At first, she'd just smoothly change the subject, which I figured was normal. Nobody really wants to hear about their ex's new relationship in detail, right? But then she started making these subtle little comments that felt loaded with meaning. Like I'd mentioned that Madison and I had gone hiking over the weekend, and Lisa would say, "Oh, that's nice," in this tone that clearly suggested it wasn't nice at all. Or when I'd talk about some future plans Madison and I were making, like looking at houses or discussing engagement seriously, Lisa would get this particular look on her face, like I was telling her about some cute fantasy I was having instead of real plans with real consequences. The breaking point came when I realized Lisa had somehow figured out my entire daily schedule and routine. I'm a pretty predictable person. I work fairly regular hours at the consulting firm, hit the gym on Mondays and Wednesdays after work, do my grocery shopping on Sunday mornings when the stores are less crowded, and get my coffee at the same place every weekday around 8 in the morning before heading to the office. This is all pretty normal routine stuff that anyone could figure out if they were paying close attention to someone's habits over time. But Lisa wasn't just paying casual attention. She was actively planning her own schedule around mine in ways that were becoming impossible to ignore. I'd finish my workout at the gym and walk out to the parking lot, only to see her car pulling in just as I was leaving. I'd be walking out of the grocery store on Sunday morning with my bags, and she'd be walking in through the entrance doors like she'd been waiting for that exact moment. She'd already be sitting at the coffee shop when I arrived for my usual morning routine, like she'd been there waiting for me to show up. That's when I started talking to Madison about what was happening, and it turned out she'd been thinking the exact same thing. but hadn't wanted to say anything because she didn't want to seem jealous or controlling or paranoid. But Madison had definitely noticed that I was coming home from routine errands with all these stories about running into Lisa, and it was happening way too frequently to be purely random coincidence. Madison's not normally the jealous type at all. She's confident and secure in our relationship. But even she was starting to say things like, "This is genuinely weird behavior for someone who supposedly moved on from your relationship 5 years ago." So I decided to be completely direct about the situation the next time I saw Lisa at the coffee shop. I told her straight up that I was happy and committed in my relationship with Madison, that we were serious about building a future together, and that while I didn't mind being polite and friendly when we happened to run into each other around town, I wasn't interested in rekindling anything from our past relationship. I thought I was being clear but not unnecessarily mean about setting appropriate boundaries, just handling the situation like a mature adult who wanted to avoid any potential misunderstandings or complications. But none of these men had Tyler's depth, you know? None of them truly knew me the way Tyler knew me. None of them could make me laugh until my sides hurt the way he could. None of them felt like home the way Tyler did when he held me. I found myself constantly comparing every single one of them to Tyler, and they all came up short in different ways. But Lisa's response was what really scared me and made me realize how deep this problem actually went. She got this particular smile on her face, this knowing, condescending smile that made my skin crawl, and said something like, "I can see she's really got you convinced that this is what you want." She said it like I was some confused, naive kid who didn't understand his own mind or emotions. Like my feelings for Madison weren't real or valid. Like they were just some temporary delusion I was experiencing. Then she started talking about how I seemed different now, how I wasn't being true to myself anymore, how she could see that I wasn't really happy even though I thought I was. The whole conversation felt like she was trying to gaslight me about my own life and my own feelings. Like she somehow knew better than I did what was good for me, what would make me truly happy, what I really wanted deep down in my heart. It was manipulative as hell, and frankly, it pissed me off more than anything else she could have said. Here I was, trying to be respectful and honest about my boundaries and my current relationship, and she was basically telling me that I was lying to myself about being genuinely in love with someone else. The arrogance and presumption of that response was staggering, like she had some special insight into my inner emotional life that I somehow lacked about myself. After that conversation, I started paying much more attention to Lisa's behavior patterns, and it became completely obvious that none of these encounters had ever been accidental coincidences. She was actively and deliberately seeking me out, learning my daily routines and habits, systematically inserting herself into my regular schedule and daily life. That's not normal ex-girlfriend behavior by any stretch of the imagination. That's stalking behavior, plain and simple. And the fact that she couldn't accept a direct, honest conversation about boundaries, the fact that she responded to my clear communication with manipulation and gaslighting, made it crystal clear that being polite and hoping she'd get the hint wasn't going to solve this problem. I needed to do something more drastic to protect myself and my relationship with Madison. Lisa's escalation and delusion. So Tyler thinks he can just dismiss me with some bullshit rehearsed speech about boundaries and being happy with his little girlfriend? Please. I could see right through that entire performance. He was obviously saying what he thought he was supposed to say, what Madison had probably coached him to say during their conversations about me being back in town. But his eyes were telling a completely different story than his words. You don't just turn off 4 years of real, deep love because some basic girl convinces you that hiking trips and quinoa salads are the keys to happiness and fulfillment in life. Jake was too cocky and self-absorbed, always talking about his latest client conquests and checking himself out in every reflective surface we passed. Daniel was incredibly boring, despite all his money. He had the personality of wet cardboard and couldn't hold a conversation about anything deeper than quarterly reports. The wine bar guy was pretentious beyond belief, constantly name-dropping obscure vintages and acting like he was some kind of sophisticated connoisseur, when really he was just trying to impress me. Then my friend Kelly calls me with this devastating news. Tyler had just proposed to Madison. Apparently, it happened over the weekend at some supposedly romantic restaurant downtown. And now they were planning this big engagement party for the following Saturday night to celebrate with all their friends and family. I managed to keep my composure during that phone call because I'm not the type of person to fall apart emotionally when someone else is listening. But inside, I was absolutely reeling from this information. This was really happening. Tyler was actually going to marry this girl who'd manipulated him into thinking he was happy and fulfilled with this shallow, constrained version of himself. It didn't make any logical sense. It wasn't rational. And it definitely wasn't what Tyler really wanted deep down in his heart, beneath all the conditioning and influence Madison had subjected him to over the past few years. He was obviously panicking after our conversation about boundaries, trying to lock himself into this relationship permanently before he could come to his senses and realize what he was throwing away. The engagement wasn't about love. It was about fear. Fear of admitting that he'd made a mistake, fear of disappointing Madison, fear of acknowledging that what we'd had together was irreplaceable. The engagement party was happening that weekend, and I knew I had to do something decisive. Not to cause drama or create a scene, of course. Just to be there, to be present, to remind Tyler of what real connection and understanding looked like before he made this irreversible mistake that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Maybe seeing me in that environment, surrounded by all the people who knew us as a couple, would wake him up to what he was really doing. Maybe it would make him realize he was rushing into marriage out of fear and social pressure instead of genuine love and commitment. I got dressed up for the occasion, but nothing too dramatic or attention-seeking. I definitely wanted to look good, but I wasn't trying to upstage the bride-to-be or anything inappropriate like that. I picked out this elegant black dress that Tyler always said looked incredible on me. He used to tell me I looked like a movie star whenever I wore it. I did my hair the way he used to love it, with those soft curls that framed my face perfectly. I even wore the perfume he bought me for our second anniversary, this expensive French fragrance that he said reminded him of jasmine in summer evenings. These weren't grand gestures or anything manipulative. They were just subtle reminders of who I really was, of what he was giving up, of the deep history and connection we shared that couldn't be replaced by someone new. The engagement party was being held at some generic event venue downtown, the kind of place you rent when you want everything to look nice and polished in photographs, but don't really care about personality or meaning or creating something truly memorable. It was very Madison, very safe and conventional, very boring in that way that tries to please everyone, but ends up being forgettable. I walked into the party like I belonged there, because honestly, I did belong there. I was a significant part of Tyler's life, someone who cared about his happiness and well-being more than anyone else in that room, including Madison herself.